The flight logs were already in the record when he walked in claiming poverty, not subpoenaed that morning, not rushed in at the last minute by a paralegal who'd been up all night, filed, organized, tabbed, 47 pages of aviation records obtained legally from the FAA, cross-reference against the dates his daughter had gone without the specialist visit her pediatrician had requested in October, without the adaptive learning software her school had recommended in January, without the winter coat her mother had put on a credit card in December because the temperature dropped and the coat she had the previous year no longer fit, and Dominic Reeves Ashton had not responded to a single text about it. His daughter was 9 years old. Her name was Zola. She had a processing disorder that the right tools and the right support could absolutely work around. Her teachers had said so. Her therapist had said so. Her mother had said so to anyone who would listen, including 3 different attorneys and a mediator, and now finally a judge. Her mother's name was Priya. She was 41. She had a degree in computer science from Georgia Tech, which was actually how she'd met Dominic, a conference in Austin 12 years ago, back when he was building his second startup, and she was an engineer at a firm he was trying to poach talent from. She had believed in him before the money. She had stayed through 2 failed ventures and a near bankruptcy that they had navigated together, eating out of a shared budget spreadsheet she maintained herself on a laptop she bought refurbished while he pitched and failed and pitched again. The third company worked, Celerate Technologies, cloud infrastructure, Series D funding at a $2.4 billion valuation. A profile in Wired magazine with a photo of Dominic in a charcoal crew neck standing in front of a server rack with his arms crossed, looking like a man who had invented the future rather than a man whose wife had tracked every invoice and held the operation together during the 18 months it almost didn't survive. The Wired profile did not mention Priya, neither did the TED Talk, neither apparently did Dominic's memory, because when he moved out of their Frisco home 2 years ago and into a penthouse in the design district, the story he told to his board, to his investors, to anyone who would listen was that he had built this alone. He had not built it alone. He sat at the respondents' table in a slim-cut charcoal suit and the particular stillness of a man who has been the smartest person in every room he'd entered for the last 6 years. He had 2 attorneys, both from a firm that specialized in high net worth divorce and whose hourly rates had a comma in them. He had submitted a financial disclosure listing his annual income at $340,000. Salary only, clean, simple. The kind of disclosure that looks reasonable until you understand what it's attached to. Priya had understood immediately. She sat at the petitioner's table in a burgundy blazer with a yellow legal pad in front of her that she'd been writing on since 7:30 that morning. Her attorney, a woman named Claudette, who had 30 years in Dallas family law and the disposition of someone who had heard every version of this story and stopped being surprised by any of them, had a rolling cart next to the table. The cart had 4 banker's boxes on it. 4. Dominic's lead attorney, whose name was Hargrove and who had the jaw of a man accustomed to getting what he asked for, noticed the cart when he sat down. He noticed the boxes. He leaned toward Dominic and said something. Dominic glanced at the cart, looked away, and placed both hands flat on the table in the posture of a man deciding to remain unbothered. He remained unbothered for approximately 9 minutes. Judge Vonda B entered at 9:07. The bailiff called order. The court reporter, who had been at the 255th for 11 years and had the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that the most important thing in her job was to miss nothing, set her fingers and waited. Judge Vonda B opened the file. She did not look up immediately. She read in the way she always read, completely, without performance, as if the room existed at her convenience rather than the other way around. Mr. Station, she said, still looking at the file, your financial disclosure lists your income at $340,000 annually. Yes, Your Honor, that's your salary. That's correct. She turned a page. Celerate Technologies completed a secondary public offering 14 months ago. You held 4.2 million shares at the time of offering. Hargrove rose. Your Honor, my client's equity position is a long-term counselor. I didn't ask you. She looked up. Sit down. He sat. His jaw tightened in the way jaws tighten when the word no arrives in a format a man isn't accustomed to receiving it. The offering price was $62 per share. Judge Vonda B continued looking at Dominic. You liquidated 800,000 shares at that offering. She set the page down. That is $49,600,000 in one transaction 14 months ago. The number landed in the room the way large numbers land when they've been hidden, not with surprise exactly, but with the specific weight of something that was always true becoming suddenly visible. Priya did not react. She had known this number. She had gone looking for it the way you go looking for something you already know exists because you were there when it was built. She had found it in the SEC filings on a Tuesday night after Zola was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water she forgot to drink. And she had looked at that number for a long time before writing it down on a yellow legal pad and calling Claudette the next morning. She had written it down because she needed to see it outside of her own head to make sure she wasn't being unreasonable. She had been told she was being unreasonable so many times in the last 2 years that the accusation had developed a kind of gravitational pull. A woman who tracks down SEC filings and FAA records and puts them in bankers' boxes is a woman who has been told she's overreacting and has decided that documents don't overreact. Dominic looked at Hargrove. Hargrove chose his approach carefully. He rose with the measured confidence of a man who had a planned response to this exact moment. Your Honor, the liquidation event was a one-time capital transaction, not income. And under Texas Family Code, the distinction between, I know the distinction, Counselor Judge Vonda B said. I also know that a man who liquidated $49 million in shares 14 months ago subsequently filed a declaration with this court stating he was unable to meet the petitioner's requested support amount without significant financial hardship. She picked up the declaration, read from it without theater, significant financial hardship. She set it down. Help me understand that. Hargrove had a prepared answer. It involved tax obligations and reinvestment commitments and portfolio restructuring and the non-liquid nature of remaining equity, positions and the operational demands of leading a company at a critical growth. Judge Vonda B let him finish. Then she looked at Claudette. Counselor, she said, I believe you have exhibits. Claudette stood up. What came out of those 4 bankers' boxes over the next 51 minutes was not a story about greed in the abstract. It was a story told in receipts, in invoices and logs and statements and records that had been obtained legally, methodically, and with the patience of a woman who had spent 2 years watching someone she had helped build a life with pretend that life had been built without her. The first box was flights. 47 pages of FAA records, 19 private jet flights in the 18 months he had been claiming hardship. Not commercial first class, private charter flights on a Gulfstream G550 operated through a company called Meridian Aviation Solutions, billed to a subsidiary LLC. Claudette had located through a sequence of registered agent filings that had taken a forensic accountant 6 weeks and 2 subpoenas to fully untangle. Claudette put the dates on a board. On one side, the flight dates, the destinations, the cost per flight. On the other side, the dates Priya had texted Dominic about Zola's expenses, his responses or the absence of responses, and the cost she had covered herself. October 14th, Priya texts about the specialist visit, $340 out of pocket, insurance denied, no response. October 14th, Dominic boards a charter from Dallas Love Field to Scottsdale, flight costs $11,400. November 3rd, Priya texts again, still no response. November 9th, Dominic flies to Cabo San Lucas, return November 13th, cost $16,800. December 19th, Priya buys the winter coat on a credit card, $49. December 21st, Dominic flies 14 people to Aspen for what a subsequent Instagram post described as a company vision retreat. The retreat had a photographer. The photographer posted a reel. The reel had a song. The song was about success. Hargrove objected twice during this section. Both times, Judge Vonda B denied the objection with a word and a look, the look that Claudette, who who had been in this courtroom 3 times before today, recognized as the look that means the judge has already decided where the floor is and is watching to see who falls through it. The second box was the Aspen house, not a rental, a property, a 4-bedroom ski-in, ski-out house in Pickens County, Colorado, purchased 11 months ago through a trust that Dominic's estate attorney had established with the specific and not particularly subtle structure of a man trying to keep something out of a court's view. The trust was in a name Claudette read into the record, a holding company with an unremarkable name that sounded like it was designed to be unremarkable, and it had been unremarkable right up until Priya's forensic accountant spent 6 weeks being thorough. The purchase price was $4,200,000 cash. Hargrove stood with the urgency of a man who could feel the ground moving. Your Honor, the asset in question is held in a trust structure that predates counselor. Judge Vonda B's voice was quiet and complete. Your client submitted documentation to this court indicating he could not meet the petitioner's support request. I now have evidence of a cash real estate purchase for $4.2 million during the same period. She set her pen down. You have one opportunity to explain that discrepancy in a way that does not result in a finding of contempt. Take your time. Hargrove took his time. The explanation involved depreciation models and trust instrument language and fiduciary obligations to other stakeholders in the holding structure and the distinction between personal assets and trust-held assets under Texas Property Code. And it was the kind of explanation that sounded like something until it didn't, until the logic of it unraveled against the simplicity of the facts underneath. The way elaborate things always unravel against simple things when someone is paying attention. Judge Vonda B was paying attention. She had been paying attention since before 9 o'clock that morning. Dominic looked at his hands. He had been looking at his hands for the last 20 minutes, not at his attorneys, not at the board where the flights and the texts and the costs had been laid side by side, not at Priya, who had looked at him exactly once during these proceedings, briefly, in the way you look at something you once loved and are no longer willing to look at for long. He was looking at his hands the way a person looks at something they built that turned out to be load-bearing in the wrong direction. Zola had been diagnosed at 7. Priya had sat in a pediatric neurologist's office in Plano and listened to the diagnosis, and on the drive home had pulled over on the tollway because she needed a minute before she could keep driving. And she had sat there with her hazards on and cried for exactly as long as she needed to, and then pulled back into traffic because Zola was in the back seat and Zola needed her to drive. She had never told Dominic about pulling over. She didn't know why. Maybe because by then she already understood at a level below language that his response would center his own feelings about the diagnosis rather than hers or Zola's. Maybe because she was already, without naming it, beginning to understand that she was going to be doing most of this alone. She had been doing most of it alone for 2 years. She sat at the petitioner's table now with her yellow legal pad in front of her and Claudette to her right and 4 banker's boxes of documents that she had assembled herself. In the evenings and on weekends while Zola slept, because she was a computer scientist who had been with a man for 12 years and had watched him operate and knew down to the process level exactly how he hid things and exactly where to look. She did not look satisfied. She did not look vindicated. She looked like a woman who has been running for a long time and has just been told she can stop. The face that carries 2 years of being called difficult, unreasonable, unable to move on. That face, when the record finally matches what it always knew, does not look like triumph. It looks like the specific exhaustion of a person who was right and fought to prove it and is now sitting inside the proof and feeling more than anything tired. Judge Vonda B saw it in the way that she always sees what is actually in front of her, not the version that has been packaged for legal consumption, not the narrative that the money built, but the actual human reality sitting at the petitioner's table. She saw it. Miss Priya, she said, and her voice shifted in that particular way. It shifted when she addressed someone directly, from the precise register of judicial authority into something that was still authoritative and was also unmistakably human. This court sees what you brought in today and what it cost you to bring it. Priya pressed her lips together, looked at the bench, held it. She nodded once. That was all. That was enough. The ruling took 11 minutes to deliver. Child support set at $31,000 per month based on imputed income, inclusive of equity compensation, liquidation events, and beneficial use of trust-held assets. Retroactive to the original petition date, 22 months. Full arrears due within 90 days. The false hardship declaration referred to the court's fraud review process. The Aspen trust structure referred to a forensic review to determine whether additional assets had been obscured from discovery. And then the last part, Mr. Reeves Ashton, Judge Vonda B said, she did not look at his attorney, she looked at him. You built a company worth billions. You understand leverage. You understand strategy. You understand how to structure things so they look like one thing while being another. She paused. Your daughter has a processing disorder. The right support will change the trajectory of her entire life. You have known this for 2 years and you have responded with flight records. Another pause. This court is done allowing the structuring. Dominic opened his mouth, closed it. His hands were still on the table, and they were very still, in the manner of hands that have nothing left to do. Hargrove put a hand on his arm. Dominic did not move. In the gallery, 3 rows back, a woman who had driven from Garland to be here for her daughter Priya's mother, who had watched her child work double shifts as a single parent and assemble legal boxes at midnight and hold herself together through every continuance and every delay and every... That woman put her face in both hands and did not make a sound. She did not need to make a sound. The room already understood. Outside in the hallway, 40 minutes later, Priya sat on a bench with her blazer across her lap and her phone in her hand. She was going to call her mother. She was going to call Claudette about next steps. She was going to pick Zola up from school at 3:15 and take her for tacos and not say a word about what happened today because Zola was 9 and Zola deserved a Tuesday afternoon that was just a Tuesday afternoon. But first, she sat there for a moment in the quiet of a courthouse hallway and let herself feel the floor. Solid, present, finally, permanently hers. He flew 19 private jets while his daughter went without, and the only turbulence he ever hit was a judge from Dallas who read every page.